Okay, good afternoon. My name is Pedro. I'm finishing a PhD with Jan.14 in SOAS, and I'll be presenting here an empirical SSE model for Portugal and do a brief analysis of the 2011-2015 austerity program. So this is just a presentation plan. I won't go through it. So the motivation is twofold. First is to add to answer to Zez and Zeza's call to add to the growing collection of empirical SFC models. In this, my model has maybe three distinctive features. The first, it tries to align the model monetary flows with actual transactions, with actual monetary flows. The causality of the model is mostly focused on nominal variables. So volume variables are kept to a minimum just to connect with private employment, basically. And I employ a continuous time framework, which means that I use some formulation drawn from system dynamics literature. And I implement the quadruple entry blueprint principle by design. We will see what that means in practice. And then I'll use this to briefly analyze the austerity period and contrast with existing DSGA-based assessments. I mean, there's a big difference in the approach. The counterfactual scenarios that I'll be showing are directly comparable to the data, while DSG, they have this shock to the steady state approach, which is very different, but I'll try to contrast it later. So the accounting structure follows the paper I wrote with Adam and Janis, basically, where we derive a model, a SEC accounting structure directly from national accounting data. We propose this term data consistency, which is a bit different from what Zeza has proposed before, which we just say that a model is data consistency if the accounting structure allows the connection between the model and the national accounting items to be maintained through time. So this for non-financial transactions is trivial, but for the financial accounts, it requires some care. We also use, like many other SFC models, residual transactions and residual financial instruments to capture everything that we don't explicitly model. And then we propose, this is something new, that we propose three adjustments to align the model flows with actual monetary flows. So we recover interest flows before fees in, so the actual interest flows. We address the issue of inputted rents by removing the gross operating surplus of households. I use households and big two because this is households versus non-profit institutions serving households, and we decompose government consumption. We will see later on what this means. Okay, so this is the transaction flow matrix with the original data. We pull the data, like in typical FCC models, we have a production column that is always set to zero, like the final demand components are paid into there and income from production comes out of there. We can see that here in this initial example, the residual transaction is set to zero because all the non-financial transactions are here. And then we simplify this considerably without getting into much detail. So this is like the transactional flow matrix of the model before those three adjustments that I mentioned. So now the residual transaction is playing its parts. It's making sure that net lending, net borrowing is achieved in all data. So this is percentage of GDP from 95 to 2024. This values here. Moving on. Okay, so now those three adjustments very briefly. The interest payments, interest flows that are in national accounts that are not the actual interest flows. They are based like on vulnerable funds. They have an hypothetical interest rate that supposedly makes borrowers and lenders happy. So there's equilibrium interest rates that is then applied to deposits and loans. And this gives us the D41 of the national account. So the D41G is the actual interest payments, and then we recover this. And the difference is considered financial intermediation service indirectly measured. So this is to give value added to the financial sector, which is bullshit, but whatever. And so we recover this initial interest flows, this actual interest flows for households and for non-financial corporations, and we adjust consumption and gross operating surplus of the non-financial corporation sector. Then we address inputted rents as well, which is an imputation to capture the value of people who live in their own homes. So this is considered P3 consumption, which is also considered P1 output of households. And so in this there is intermediate consumption P2. Maybe I should be using this. So this P2 is intermediate consumption associated with this production of output. So it's the renovation you do on your house. It's also included here FISIM of mortgages, and this is other taxes on production minus other subsidies on production. And so what we do is remove the gross operating surplus of households, and this part P2 and D29 minus D29 now becomes consumption. I mean, this is done for Portugal, but not for all countries you can do that, because for some countries, gross operating surplus of households also includes actual paid rents. This is for Portugal. This is exclusively from homeowner occupiers. And the third adjustment is we decompose government consumption into wages, which we pay directly to households. Gross operating surplus, which is basically consumption of fixed capital. So this is not an actual monetary flow, so we remove it from the model. And the remaining part is spending of government net of sales. So this, for instance, in the previous slide, you could see that government consumption is 18.6%. This 12.5 is wages, and 3.4 is this net spending, and the rest is gross operating surplus, which we remove. This means that the GDP of the model is a bit different from the actual GDP. So we have private GDP in the model. That is what happens here in the production account. To this, we add wages to get the GDP of the model, and then we have to add these three things that we removed to get to the GDP of the data. Okay, this is the balance sheet simplifications. We do a big simplification, typical FCC models, where we have financial corporation has the counterparts of the financial instruments of the other sectors. We aggregate F2, F3, and F4 into deposits or debts, depending on asset or liability. For the rest of the world sector, we consider equity on the asset and liability side, because this helps with the balance sheet dynamics. The rest goes to the residual. This is significant for households and non-financial corporations, so we treat it accordingly. This means that, for instance, for households, I treat this as a more riskier investment, so that in my portfolio equation, in the balance sheet dynamics equation, I treat this as a more riskier equation investment when compared to deposits. So I consider master's debt for governments to get more sensible, more reasonable implied interest rates, and the same thing for non-consolidated deposits, which I consider for non-financial corporations, to get, once again, more reasonable interest rates to better model the interest flows. And finally, for households, I expand the balance sheet. So deposits are separated into currency and transferable deposits and other deposits. And debt is separated into mortgages and other debts. One thing regarding this implementation of the quadruple entry bookkeeping principle by design. I mean, in discrete time models, in typical SSC models, on the left, you can see, this is how it's usually done, I believe, which is first you compute the non-financial accounts balance. And then on the second step, you distribute this through the assets and liabilities, right? And this this quadruple entry bookkeeping principle is enforced by this equality. Probably due to working in continuous time, I do the accounting a little different. So non-financial transactions are assigned to specific financial instruments. So wages in this example are paid into transferable deposits, taxes come out of transferable deposits and out of consumption. And then there's financial transactions that models balance sheet dynamics. So this, once you put this, the quadruple booking entry principle is established by design, and so this ensures full consistency in the account. So that how in the SNA it is stated. Okay, now for the behavioral equation, like I said, this is a bit different from what is usual. I focus the causalities on the nominal level. This is just a bit tongue-in-cheek. The nominal is the real, for what I say. So the volume variables are statistical constructs. They are not directly observable. So this means that price effects on nominal variables must be taken into account. So volume variables are kept to a minimum. The only thing I need is to connect this to employment, this nominal realm. And what I do this, for instance, the imports deflator is exogenous to the model. So I need a deflator for the total demand to deflate nominal demand and then obtain a volume GDP, and this then will impact employment. So this, I only need one deflator. In practice, I have two. I separate the total demand into exports excluding tourism and domestic demand plus tourism expenses. Like I said, so the behavioral equations, they draw a lot from the system dynamics literature. One example is this trend function, which captures perceived changes or changes in variables. I have here very quickly what this is. So that from an exponential smoothing of the variable, let's say the variable x, I obtain a reference condition. From this reference condition, I obtain an immediate trend, which is calculated here, and then the actual trend tends to this immediate trend. So the THR states the time horizon of the reference condition, and this is a time to perceive trend. So, and this is represented by this in the following equation. I use trend, the variable, and the parameters. I mean, on the estimation approach, this is done individually. Each equation estimated individually, then some adjustments once I put the model together. The estimation period is from 2003 to 2024, which means I get a COVID period, which I consider exogenous for these 2 years, 2020 and 2021. Still, before going to the equations, this is an important variable of the model. So this is what I call the Portugal risk premium. It's supposed to capture general economic sentiment and credit market conditions. Despite this vagueness, it's calculated directly from the data. It's based on two ideas. The first is that banks' funding costs can be decomposed into a benchmark risk-free rate plus a risk premium that reflects economic outlook and banking sector riskiness. And this risk premium is our Portugal risk premium. The second idea is that banks' funding costs plus a spread give us the rate on new loans, and that banks' funding costs minus the spread give us the rate on new deposits. So from the data on new deposits and loans, I first obtain an hypothetical financing rate, so like a midpoint between that, and the difference from this to the 3-month Euribor, which represents the benchmark risk-free rate, gives me the PRP. So this is used in several equations, as we'll see next, and it is also a spread of the interest rates, so in the interest rate dynamics also. So we can see how it behaves in this period. So we can see that the financial crisis, it increased, then it stabilized, decreased again. This stability and growth programs were the first austerity measures implemented in Portugal. The fourth one did not pass in the parliament, so there were elections. This led to the bailout program. A right-wing government won the elections. They were aligned with the bailout. They even went further than what was in the bailout in terms of austerity measures. Then we can see the Draghi speech at the peak of this PRP. Then in 2013, the Constitutional Court in Portugal considered some austerity measures as illegal, so they were reversed. There was some easing of the austerity in that period. Things started to improve in the PRP and in reality. The bailout program ended, and in the end of 2015, a left-wing government won the elections, promising to remove the austerity measures much faster than the previous government. So this is taking this PRP to tell a bit of the story of the austerity programs. Okay, onto the equation. For instance, this is the consumption function. At its basis is a typical post-Keynesian consumption function with disposable income. And I use total assets instead of net worth. And to this, I add two effects. An effect of the PRP, which has this exponential form here in orange. So this is the function, the exponential function. This is the form, the shape of the function. And as I said, we need to take into account price changes into the nominal variables. And what I do in consumption is this domestic demand deflated short-term minus long-term trend. So this captures unanticipated changes in price. So this difference right here. So this longer term trend captures like the expected level of inflation, and this shorter term trend captures the the actual change, and so this deviation gives us an unanticipated price changes, which have an effect on consumption. This is asymmetric because when prices are increasing, households probably can't maintain their levels of real consumption, so the effect is asymmetric. Quickly, the gross capital formation equation. This is a second order acceleration mechanism. The difference for the first is that what is investment in the first order acceleration mechanism is here is a target, so there is a further delay in investment. When I was estimating individually when I was testing these two formulations, there was not a big difference. Initially, I had the first order acceleration mechanism, but once I put the model together, the feedback effects were much higher in the first case, so I opted for this one. I add to this the PRP effect similar to what you have in consumption, and the real financing rate effect. So this is a generalized logistic effect function for a deflated interest rate on your debt of non-financial corporations, deflated by a perceived change in the perceived inflation level for firms, so with these parameters. Finally, the last equation I'll show is the evolution of private employment. So the change in private employment depends on the change, like I said, of private GDP in volume, which is here in this blue part. Yes. So this is basically a linear effect. It has a small non-linearity, and to this I add this effect of the investment rate. So this means that for higher levels of the investment rate, the growth in employment is lower. So a higher investment leads to higher productivity of labor, so lower level of employment. And finally, I add this full employment effect that basically says that when unemployment reaches closest to zero, the change in employment is also close to zero. So we don't have employment higher than the active population. Okay, so now the baseline scenario. So this is how nominal GDP compares with the data from 2003 to 2024. That blue, the 20 and 21 is the COVID period. So in red is the continuous time simulation of the model, and the points are annual averages that compare with the data. So this is chain link GDP, private employment, which is the only endogenous employment. Public employment is exogenous. This is government deficit, net lending, net borrowing. This is the external balance. I mean, very quickly, and on to the counterfactual scenarios. So I have three scenarios. The first is considers if there were no tax increases. So these three graphs, these three plots on top. So in blue is what happened, and in red is the counterfactual scenario. So the no tax increases is the three graphs on top. The no expenditure cuts is the three graphs below. So in red, the counterfactual, in blue, what happened. And the final scenario is the combination of these two. So just one note on this, and this thing on implied tax rates and policy tax rates. For instance, because there are differences, in 2012, there was a big increase in the policy tax rates in the income tax rates and production tax rate, but this doesn't appear in the implied tax rate because there was a big decline in average wage, for instance. So, I mean, we need to be careful in this analysis of this aggregate tax rates and implied tax rates. Okay, some quick results. So, I mean, obviously, the economic activity is much higher in the no austerity scenarios. I mean, what can I say? Interestingly, I mean, you can see that effect on the investment rate on employment. For instance, in volume terms, the no expenditure cuts, the no tax increases is lower than the no austerity scenario in terms of volume GDP, but in terms of employment, it's in the end it surpasses it. This is because it is a later growth in economic activity, so associated with a lower investment rate, so with a lower productivity of labor associated in this. Okay, on to the variables that the austerity measures were intended to correct. So on the top left, we have government net lending and borrowing as a percentage of GDP. We can see that fiscal consolidation happened endogenously in all scenarios. Net worth of government, there are differences, but in the end, the trajectory was picking up as well for the no austerity scenario. The external balance stabilizes at around minus 2.8% of GDP for the no austerity scenario. So this seems to be the real trade-off between output and external balance, more than the fiscal consolidation, the fiscal sustainability. That is what it seems to indicate. Okay, a quick comparison with, I mean, this was the austerity period inspired some fiscal policy analysis by some DSG models. I mean, like I said, these are very different approaches, but we can see the difference. They, for instance, in 2010, they simulated a temporary stimulus with several instruments, and this leads to lower GDP than in the steady state after the second year. Then they do a permanent stimulus, but it's not really a permanent stimulus because they turn on the fiscal rule after the second year. So they increase tax, so they increase urban consumption and increase taxes at the same time. And this has this catastrophic consequence in because of distortionary taxes. And finally, they have a paper on the test different strategies to fiscal consolidation, and they show that expenditure cuts have a positive effect on GDP, even on a very short term, like 5-7 years. It's already had positive effects on GDP. So very different results, very different analysis. Just to conclude, I mean, I won't go into this. I'm over time. Just to remind the limitations, I would say that the number of exogenous variables is something that I can improve, and the part of other falls is common to many stock constituted models. I don't know how people endogenize this stuff. The weak balance sheet interaction is also a problem in my view. The financial corporations are a passive counterpart here, and that's discussion about tax rates. Okay, I guess that's it.
I keep it right, but I'll
yeah,
but there are a number of channels that you sort of cut down. For example, like force or exogenous,
yeah,
or exogenous that favors the finding or advises the results in the real finding. For example, you find that physical policy creates a huge expenditure effect because we're cutting down a number of channels that would,
yeah.
So that's one point. But my question, like very simple question, is why do you continuous time frame and specific type of estimation method that you do? Like, what is the motivation for doing that? Like, why not stick to the conventional and also of that your model structure is really complex, it's highly non-linear, so it's fine move on you take this.
Yeah, I mean, because it gives me more options to model the equation. I mean, this all this adjustment to targets, that is possible in continuous time with different time lags. I think it gives us much more flexibility in inserting certain dynamics than what is typically found in discrete time stock flow consistent models, I think.
We have a complete example. One is in a continuous time frame, and I would like to like a very concrete example that can justify this. If you have one in mind, otherwise.
I mean, this. I don't know. I'm not a specialist on this, but this type of equations they are possible to have in a discrete time econometric models. I don't. This type of effects, nonlinear effects. This. Yeah, sure.
Time frame saying that instead of model the real time adjustment, something that you when you use discrete, you say like
Average.
But I think you can combine with three times high frequency or mixed frequency monitor, like high frequency data, which you can use as a predictor of the low frequency. So I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no specialist on econometrics, so
Um, it seems like the model, strategic, right, that drives a lot of what it is in the model, and that's the what it is distribution.
yeah,
And that is the one in credit market conditions and economic thinking. But is again this variable, even with like volume, is that not inverted? It is.
It's-
So that what is happening in the model, really, what is happening there.
I mean, I could try to endogenize it somehow, but yeah, I mean, in many models, you deal with the crisis period with a dummy variable, right? But I mean, this instead of using a dummy for this, it tries to give it some more richer dynamics. But yeah. Sorry. I had that discussion in the paper before, but I was finding some unusual dynamics due to some specificities on how I modeled the deflator. So in volume terms, the things were a bit too complicated to show here. So yeah, but yeah, I had that discussion before.
We can.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.